Hey guys, Viking warriors might have struck terror into hearts on battlefields, but in their daily lives the reality was completely different. Their hygiene habits, marriage traditions, and social roles would surprise even the modern world. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The popular image of Vikings as unwashed, barbaric raiders couldn't be further from the truth. In reality, Viking society placed an extraordinary emphasis on personal cleanliness that would put many medieval civilizations to shame. Archaeological evidence and historical accounts reveal a culture obsessed with hygiene, grooming, and physical appearance in ways that seem almost modern by today's standards. The morning routine of a typical Viking began before dawn with what they called washing the day clean. Unlike their contemporaries across Europe, Vikings believed that daily bathing was not merely a luxury but a spiritual and social necessity. They understood that cleanliness was directly connected to social status, marriageability, and even divine favor. A dirty Viking was considered cursed by the gods, unfit for both battle and love. Viking homes, regardless of social class, featured dedicated washing areas. Even the humblest farmstead included a designated space where family members could cleanse themselves. These areas were typically located near the kitchen hearth, where water could be easily heated. The wealthy built elaborate bathhouses, complete with wooden tubs large enough for multiple people and sophisticated drainage systems that channeled used water away from living spaces. The process of daily washing followed strict rituals passed down through generations. Men and women alike began each day by washing their faces, hands, and arms in cold water drawn from wells or nearby streams. This initial cleansing was believed to awaken the body and prepare the mind for the day's challenges. Hot water, precious and time-consuming to prepare, was reserved for more thorough washing that occurred several times per week. Saturday was universally recognized as washing day throughout Scandinavian society. The day's name in Old Norse, Laugardagur, literally translates to washing day or bath day. On these days, entire families would engage in comprehensive cleansing rituals that could last several hours. Hot water was prepared in large cauldrons over open fires, herbs were gathered to scent the water, and special soaps were prepared from animal fats and wood ash. The soap-making process itself was a sophisticated art form. Viking households produced their own cleansing agents using carefully guarded family recipes. The most basic soaps combined rendered animal fat with ash from specific types of wood, particularly beech and birch. More luxurious versions incorporated imported ingredients like olive oil, obtained through trade with Mediterranean merchants. The finest soaps included aromatic herbs like lavender, mint, and juniper, which not only provided pleasant scents but were believed to possess medicinal and protective properties. Hair care occupied a position of supreme importance in Viking culture, particularly for men. A Viking warrior's hair was considered a reflection of his strength, virility, and social standing. Long, well-maintained hair was seen as a sign of divine favor and masculine power. Warriors spent considerable time and resources maintaining their locks using specialized combs carved from antler, bone, and imported ivory. The daily hair care routine was elaborate and time-intensive. Vikings used a variety of oils and treatments to keep their hair healthy and lustrous. Seal oil, obtained through hunting or trade, was particularly prized for its conditioning properties. Bear fat was another popular hair treatment, believed to transfer the animal's strength to the user. These oils were carefully worked through the hair using fingers and combs, then styled into the elaborate braids and knots that became synonymous with Viking culture. Braiding itself was an art form with deep cultural significance. Different braid patterns indicated social status, marital status, and even professional occupation. Warriors wore specific braids that identified their clan affiliation and battle experience. Married women displayed their status through intricate braiding patterns that incorporated ribbons, beads, and metallic threads. Young, unmarried women wore simpler styles that emphasized their availability for courtship. The tools used for grooming were considered precious possessions, often passed down through generations as family heirlooms. Combs were particularly valued, crafted from materials ranging from common wood to exotic walrus ivory. The most prized combs featured intricate carvings depicting mythological scenes, runes, or family symbols. These combs were so important that they were frequently buried with their owners, ensuring proper grooming in the afterlife. Beard maintenance for Viking men reached levels of sophistication that bordered on obsession. A well-groomed beard was essential for social acceptance and professional success. Vikings developed various styles of beard grooming, each with its own cultural significance. Some warriors braided their beards into elaborate patterns, while others used oils and waxes to shape them into specific forms. The most skilled groomers could create beard styles so distinctive that they became personal trademarks, recognizable from great distances. The oils and balms used for beard care were created from carefully selected ingredients. Beeswax provided hold and structure, while various animal fats offered conditioning properties. Aromatic herbs were added not only for scent but for their supposed magical properties. Juniper was believed to provide protection in battle, while mint was thought to attract favorable attention from women. These grooming products were often blessed by local priests or wise women, transforming everyday hygiene into spiritual practice. Women's beauty routines were equally elaborate and culturally significant. Viking women were expected to maintain high standards of personal appearance as reflections of their family's honor and social standing. The daily routine began with thorough face washing, using special cleansing preparations made from oats, honey, and herbs. These natural preparations were believed to maintain youthful skin and prevent the signs of aging that could diminish a woman's marriageability. Skincare in Viking society incorporated knowledge passed down through generations of women. Various plants and natural substances were used to treat different skin conditions and enhance beauty. Birch bark extract was used to combat blemishes, while crushed berries provided natural rouge for cheeks and lips. Honey was particularly prized for its moisturizing and antibacterial properties, often mixed with crushed flower petals to create luxurious face masks. The concept of dental hygiene, while primitive by modern standards, was surprisingly advanced for its time. Vikings understood the connection between oral health and overall well-being. They used specially carved toothpicks made from twigs of aromatic woods like birch and pine. These picks were often soaked in mint or other herbs believed to freshen breath and prevent tooth decay. Some Vikings filed distinctive patterns into their teeth as decorative marks, indicating both wealth and dedication to personal appearance. Nail care was another important aspect of Viking grooming. Both men and women kept their nails trimmed and clean, understanding that unkempt nails were signs of laziness or poor character. Special knife-like tools were used to trim nails, while pumice stones and rough fabrics were employed to smooth and shape them. Some wealthy Vikings even decorated their nails with intricate patterns using natural dyes and stain. The seasonal aspects of Viking hygiene adapted to the harsh Scandinavian climate. During the long winter months, when water was scarce and temperatures prohibitive, Vikings developed alternative cleansing methods. Dry brushing with rough fabrics helped remove dead skin and stimulate circulation. Snow was sometimes used for quick cleansing, particularly by warriors who needed to maintain hygiene during military campaigns. Special winter preparations included heavier oils and balms to protect skin from harsh winds and extreme temperatures. Summer grooming practices took full advantage of warmer weather and abundant water supplies. Rivers and lakes became communal bathing areas, where entire communities would gather for elaborate cleansing rituals. These summer bathing sessions were as much social events as hygienic practices, providing opportunities for courtship, gossip, and community bonding. The finest soaps and oils were reserved for these special occasions, making summer bathing a highlight of the social calendar. Trade played a crucial role in Viking grooming practices. Merchants traveled vast distances to obtain rare and exotic grooming supplies that demonstrated wealth and sophistication. Amber from the Baltic coast was ground into powders for skin treatments. Silk from the Orient was used to create luxurious washing cloths. Precious metals were incorporated into grooming tools, transforming everyday hygiene implements into works of art. The social implications of grooming extended far beyond personal preference. In Viking society, one's appearance directly reflected their family's honor and social standing. A poorly groomed individual brought shame not only upon themselves but upon their entire clan. This social pressure ensured that even the poorest Vikings made extraordinary efforts to maintain acceptable standards of cleanliness and appearance. Religious beliefs intertwined with grooming practices in complex ways. Many Vikings believed that the gods judged them not only by their actions but by their appearance. Warriors preparing for battle engaged in elaborate cleansing rituals designed to ensure divine favor. These pre-battle preparations included not only physical cleansing but spiritual purification through special prayers and offerings. The tools and products used for grooming often served multiple purposes beyond hygiene. Combs doubled as eating utensils during travel. Special oils used for hair care also served as waterproofing agents for leather goods. Soaps were occasionally used as currency in remote areas where traditional coins were scarce. This practical approach to grooming supplies demonstrated the Vikings' efficiency and resourcefulness. Seasonal festivals incorporated grooming as central elements of celebration. Spring festivals marked the end of winter's harsh grooming restrictions with elaborate communal bathing rituals. Harvest celebrations included special grooming ceremonies designed to ensure continued prosperity. These festival grooming practices often involved entire communities, strengthening social bonds while maintaining cultural traditions. The legacy of Viking grooming practices influenced Scandinavian culture for centuries after the Viking Age ended. Many traditional Scandinavian hygiene customs can trace their origins to Viking innovations and cultural values. The emphasis on cleanliness and personal appearance that characterizes modern Scandinavian societies has deep roots in Viking cultural practices that prioritized hygiene as both social necessity and spiritual obligation. As we delve deeper into Viking society, their sophisticated approach to personal hygiene provides just the first glimpse into a culture far more complex and refined than popular imagination suggests. Their grooming practices reveal a people who understood that appearance was power, that cleanliness was divine, and that personal care was inseparable from social success. Marriage in Viking society was far more than a romantic union between two individuals. It represented a complex web of economic, political, and social arrangements that could determine the fate of entire families and clans. The process of courtship, engagement, and marriage followed intricate customs that had evolved over centuries, creating a system that was both practical and deeply meaningful to those who participated in it. The journey toward marriage began long before young people reached marriageable age. Families with children would often begin informal negotiations when their offspring were still in their early teens, laying the groundwork for future alliances that would benefit both households. These early discussions were delicate affairs, conducted through intermediaries and family friends to avoid the embarrassment of direct rejection. Courtship in Viking society bore little resemblance to modern romantic ideals. Young people rarely chose their own partners based purely on attraction or emotional connection. Instead, marriages were arranged through careful consideration of family status, economic advantage, and political alliance. Parents, uncles, and clan elders played decisive roles in selecting suitable matches, weighing factors that extended far beyond the immediate couple. The concept of love, while not entirely absent from Viking marriages, was expected to develop after the wedding rather than before it. Young Vikings were taught that passion was temporary and unreliable, while practical compatibility and mutual respect formed the foundation of lasting unions. This pragmatic approach to marriage was reflected in the Old Norse saying, "Love grows in the shadow of shared burden." When a potential match was identified, the formal courtship process began with the sending of representatives. These emissaries, usually respected members of the suitor's family or trusted family friends, would approach the prospective bride's family to gauge their interest. These initial contacts were conducted with extreme formality, following protocols that had been refined over generations. The representatives would present the suitor's qualifications in terms that emphasized his practical value as a husband and provider. They would detail his land holdings, livestock, skills in warfare or craftsmanship, and family connections. Personal characteristics like bravery, intelligence, and physical strength were also highlighted, but always within the context of their practical benefits to a potential wife and her family. If the initial approach was received favorably, more detailed negotiations would commence. These discussions centered around the exchange of wealth and property that would accompany the marriage. The concept of bride price, known as mundra, was central to these negotiations. The groom's family was expected to provide valuable gifts to compensate the bride's family for the loss of their daughter's labor and potential children. The mundra typically included livestock, precious metals, weapons, jewelry, and sometimes land. The value of these gifts reflected not only the groom's wealth, but also his estimation of the bride's worth. A larger mundra indicated greater respect for the bride and her family, while also demonstrating the groom's ability to provide for his future wife. Negotiations over the mundra could last for months, with both families seeking to maximize their advantage while maintaining their honor. Parallel to the mundra negotiations, discussions would take place regarding the bride's dowry, known as heimanfylgja. This represented the wealth and property that the bride would bring to the marriage, typically provided by her father or male guardian. The dowry usually included household goods, textiles, jewelry, and sometimes animals or land. Unlike the mundra, which became the property of the bride's family, the heimanfylgja remained under the bride's control throughout the marriage. The dowry served multiple purposes beyond mere economic exchange. It provided the bride with a measure of independence within her new household, ensuring that she retained some personal wealth regardless of her husband's fortunes. In cases of divorce or widowhood, the dowry would revert to the woman or her heirs, providing crucial financial security in a society where women's economic opportunities were limited. Once the financial arrangements were settled, the families would negotiate the specific terms of the marriage contract. These agreements covered numerous practical matters, including the couple's living arrangements, inheritance rights, and the division of labor within the household. Some contracts specified which family would provide the wedding feast, while others detailed the bride's responsibilities in her new home. The engagement period, known as festar, was a crucial time for both families and the prospective couple. During this phase, the bride and groom would have limited opportunities to interact under carefully supervised conditions. These meetings served multiple purposes. They allowed the couple to become somewhat acquainted before their wedding, provided opportunities for the families to assess the match's suitability, and enabled the negotiation of final details. Festar typically lasted between 6 months and 2 years, depending on various factors, including the complexity of the financial arrangements, seasonal considerations, and the availability of resources for the wedding celebration. During this time, both families would begin preparing for the elaborate festivities that would mark the actual wedding ceremony. The bride's family used the engagement period to prepare her trousseau, a collection of clothing, linens, and household goods that would demonstrate their wealth and her readiness for married life. This preparation was a communal effort involving the bride's mothers, sisters, aunts, and female friends. The creation of elaborate textiles, particularly bed linens and clothing, was considered essential to the bride's honor and her family's reputation. Simultaneously, the groom's family would prepare for their role as hosts of the wedding celebration. This involved accumulating sufficient food and drink to feast potentially hundreds of guests, arranging accommodations for visitors from distant locations, and preparing gifts for the bride's family and wedding party. The scale of these preparations reflected the family's status and their commitment to honoring the marriage alliance. The actual wedding ceremony was a multi-day affair that combined pagan traditions with practical celebrations. The festivities typically began with a ritual exchange of gifts between the families, formally sealing the agreements negotiated during the engagement. These gift exchanges were conducted with great ceremony, with each item presented and accepted according to specific protocols. The bride's preparation for her wedding day was an elaborate process steeped in tradition and symbolism. She would be attended by a group of married women from both families, who would help her dress in her finest clothing and jewelry. The bride's hair would be arranged in the complex braided style appropriate to her new status as a married woman, often incorporating family heirlooms and precious ornaments. One of the most significant elements of the bride's preparation was the ritual removal of her maiden circlet, a simple band worn by unmarried women. This circlet would be carefully preserved and eventually passed down to the bride's own daughters. In its place, she would receive the elaborate headdress worn by married women, symbolizing her transition from maidenhood to wifehood. The groom's preparation was equally ceremonial, though it focused more on his role as a warrior and protector. He would be dressed in his finest armor and weapons, symbols of his ability to defend his new family. Male relatives would assist in this process, offering advice and blessings for his future role as husband and father. The wedding ceremony itself took place outdoors, usually at a location considered sacred to the families involved. This might be near an ancient tree, a stone circle, or another site with religious or ancestral significance. The outdoor setting reflected the Vikings' belief that marriage was a union witnessed not only by human community but by the natural and divine worlds. The ceremony began with the formal presentation of the bride to the groom's family and the community. This presentation was accompanied by speeches detailing her qualifications as a wife and her family's honor. The bride's father or guardian would formally transfer responsibility for her welfare to her new husband, using traditional phrases that had been spoken at countless Viking weddings. The exchange of rings was a central element of the wedding ceremony, but these rings differed significantly from modern wedding bands. Viking wedding rings were substantial pieces of jewelry, often featuring intricate designs and runic inscriptions. The rings served as tangible symbols of the marriage contract and were valuable enough to serve as emergency currency if needed. Following the ring exchange, the couple would participate in various ritual activities designed to ensure their fertility and prosperity. They might drink from a shared cup of mead, symbolizing their unity and commitment. In some regions, the couple would be required to walk through fire together, demonstrating their willingness to face danger as partners. These rituals varied by location and family tradition, but always emphasized the couple's new shared destiny. The wedding feast that followed the ceremony was perhaps the most important social event in the community's calendar. These celebrations could last for several days, with the host family providing abundant food, drink, and entertainment for all attendees. The scale and quality of the feast reflected directly on the family's honor and their commitment to maintaining their social obligations. The seating arrangements at the wedding feast followed strict protocols based on social hierarchy and family relationships. The bride and groom occupied places of honor, surrounded by their immediate families and most important guests. The careful orchestration of these arrangements helped reinforce social bonds and demonstrate the family's understanding of their community's power structures. Entertainment during the wedding feast included storytelling, music, dancing, and competitive games. Professional skalds might be hired to compose and perform special songs celebrating the union and the family's histories. These performances served not only as entertainment, but as public declarations of the family's status and achievements. The giving of wedding gifts was another crucial element of the celebration. Guests were expected to bring presents that would help establish the new household, including practical items like tools, cookware, and textiles. The most prestigious gifts were weapons for the groom and jewelry for the bride, items that would become family treasures passed down through generations. The morning after the wedding ceremony marked the beginning of the couple's married life, but the celebration was far from over. The morning gift ceremony provided the final formal element of the wedding process. This tradition required the groom to present his new wife with a special gift, usually valuable jewelry or property, to commemorate their first night as husband and wife. The morning gift served multiple practical purposes beyond mere symbolism. It provided the bride with additional personal wealth, demonstrating her husband's satisfaction with the marriage and his commitment to her welfare. The gift also served as a public declaration that the marriage had been properly consummated, which was important for legal and inheritance purposes. As the wedding celebrations concluded, the couple would begin their new life together, according to the arrangements negotiated during their engagement. Whether they established an independent household or joined an existing family compound depended on various factors including their ages, wealth, and family circumstances. Regardless of their living arrangements, they were now bound together by legal, economic, and social ties that were expected to last until death. The complexity and formality of Viking marriage customs reflected the crucial role that these unions played in maintaining social order and economic stability. Marriage was never merely a private matter between two individuals, but a public contract that affected entire communities. The elaborate customs surrounding engagement and wedding ceremonies ensured that these important alliances were formed with appropriate solemnity and community support. Understanding these marriage traditions provides crucial insight into Viking society's values and priorities. The emphasis on practical considerations over romantic love, the central role of family negotiation, and the public nature of wedding celebrations all reveal a culture that prioritized social stability and community welfare over individual desires. Yet within these constraints, Viking marriage customs also provided frameworks for personal growth, economic security, and the continuation of cultural traditions across generations. The position of women in Viking society defied the stereotypes that many associate with medieval cultures. Far from being powerless figures confined to domestic duties, Viking women enjoyed remarkable freedoms and wielded significant influence within their communities. Their status was complex, nuanced, and often surprising when compared to their contemporaries in other European societies. Viking women possessed legal rights that were virtually unknown in most medieval civilizations. They could own property independently, initiate divorce proceedings, and participate in legal disputes with a degree of autonomy that shocked foreign observers. These rights were not theoretical concepts, but practical realities that shaped daily life throughout Scandinavian society. The foundation of women's legal status rested on the concept of mundium, a form of legal guardianship that, while limiting in some respects, also provided protection and rights. Every woman existed under the mundium of a male relative, first her father, then her husband, and finally her sons. However, this guardianship was not absolute control, but rather a legal framework that ensured women's rights were protected and their interests represented in formal proceedings. Within the mundium system, women retained significant personal autonomy. They could not be married against their will, and their consent was legally required for any marriage arrangement. A woman could refuse a proposed match without fear of legal repercussion. though social pressure from family members might be considerable. This legal protection of marriage consent was remarkable for its time and reflected the Vikings' understanding that forced marriages often led to unhappy households and family discord. The right to initiate divorce was perhaps the most striking aspect of women's legal status. Viking women could dissolve their marriages for various reasons, including physical abuse, failure to provide financial support, or simple incompatibility. The divorce process required public declaration before witnesses, usually at a community gathering or legal assembly. The woman would formally announce her intention to divorce using specific legal formulas that had been refined over generations. Property ownership represented another area where Viking women enjoyed unusual freedoms. Upon marriage, women retained control over their dowries and any property they inherited from their families. This separate property remained under their control throughout the marriage and could not be sold or disposed of by their husbands without their explicit consent. In cases of divorce, women could reclaim their dowries and any other property they had brought to the marriage. The inheritance rights of Viking women were complex but generally favorable compared to other medieval societies. While male heirs typically received the largest portions of family wealth, particularly land and weapons, women inherited significant shares of movable property, including livestock, jewelry, textiles, and household goods. Daughters without brothers could inherit their father's entire estates, though they might be required to marry within certain time limits to ensure the family line continued. Women's participation in economic activities extended far beyond household management. Many Viking women operated successful businesses, particularly in textile production, food preparation, and small-scale trading. Archaeological evidence reveals numerous examples of female merchants who traveled extensively, conducting business in distant markets and accumulating considerable personal wealth through their commercial activities. The textile industry was dominated by women at every level, from raw material processing to finished product sales. Viking women developed sophisticated techniques for producing high-quality woolens, linens, and silks that were prized throughout medieval Europe. These textiles served not only domestic needs, but also represented valuable trade goods that could be exchanged for imported luxuries and raw materials. Brewing represented another economic sphere, where women held dominant positions. The production of ale and mead was considered women's work, and successful brewers could accumulate significant wealth and social standing. Some female brewers operated substantial enterprises, supplying not only their local communities, but also providing beverages for large-scale celebrations and festivals. Viking women's roles in religious and spiritual life were particularly prominent and influential. Many served as priestesses, oracles, and spiritual advisors within their communities. The vulva, or female shamans, held positions of tremendous respect and authority. These spiritual leaders were consulted on everything from weather predictions and crop forecasts to military strategy and political decisions. The vulva traveled throughout Scandinavian territory, moving from community to provide spiritual services. They performed divination rituals, blessed important undertakings, and served as intermediaries between the human and divine worlds. The vulva's authority was so well established that even powerful jarls and kings sought their counsel before making important decisions. Female religious authority extended to household spiritual practices as well. Women were responsible for maintaining family shrines, conducting domestic rituals, and ensuring that proper offerings were made to the gods and ancestral spirits. This spiritual responsibility gave women significant influence over family decisions and community relationships. The concept of the strong woman was central to Viking ideals of femininity. Unlike many medieval cultures that prized feminine passivity and submission, Viking society celebrated women who demonstrated intelligence, courage, and independence. The sagas are filled with accounts of remarkable women who influenced political events, led military campaigns, and shaped their community's destiny. Lagertha, one of the most famous figures from Viking history, exemplifies the strong woman ideal. According to historical accounts, she was both a skilled warrior and a capable ruler, who led her own military forces and governed territory independently. While the historical accuracy of specific details about Lagertha may be debated, her prominence in Viking literature demonstrates that female leadership and military prowess were accepted and admired within the culture. The Shield Maiden tradition, while possibly exaggerated in later literary sources, reflects real aspects of women's roles in Viking society. Archaeological evidence suggests that some women did participate in military activities, though probably not in the large numbers suggested by later romanticized accounts. Female graves containing weapons and military equipment provide tangible evidence that some women engaged in warfare alongside their male counterparts. More commonly, Viking women contributed to military efforts through logistical support, intelligence gathering, and homeland defense. During raids and extended military campaigns, women took responsibility for maintaining settlements, defending against counterattacks, and ensuring that agricultural and economic activities continued in the men's absence. The management of large households required sophisticated organizational skills and provided women with substantial authority over domestic affairs. Viking households often included extended family members, servants, slaves, and temporary guests, creating complex social environments that required careful management. The lady of the house, or husfreyja, held responsibility for coordinating all domestic activities and ensuring the household's smooth operation. Household management encompassed far more than simple housekeeping. The husfreyja supervised food production and preservation, managed textile manufacturing, coordinated seasonal agricultural activities, and handled financial planning. She allocated resources, resolved disputes among household members, and maintained relationships with neighboring families and trading partners. The keys that Viking women wore as symbols of their authority were not merely ceremonial objects, but practical tools that represented real power. These keys provided access to storerooms, treasure chests, and other secured areas where valuable goods were kept. Control over these keys meant control over the household's wealth and resources, giving women significant influence over family finances and economic decisions. Women's roles in child rearing reflected Viking society's understanding that early education shaped character and capabilities. Mothers were primarily responsible for their children's early development, teaching not only practical skills but also moral values, social expectations, and cultural traditions. This educational role gave women tremendous influence over the next generation's attitudes and behaviors. The concept of women's work in Viking society included many activities that were considered highly skilled and economically valuable. In addition to textile production and brewing, women specialized in food preservation, herbal medicine, and handicraft production. These skills were not regarded as inferior to men's work, but rather as complementary specializations that contributed to the community's overall prosperity and well-being. Medical knowledge was another area where women held particular expertise. Female healers, known as lackniers, possessed extensive knowledge of herbal remedies, surgical techniques, and diagnostic methods. They treated everything from minor injuries and common illnesses to complex medical conditions and childbirth complications. The most skilled female healers were highly respected and could command substantial fees for their services. The midwife tradition was entirely dominated by women, as was considered appropriate, given the intimate nature of childbirth. Experienced midwives possessed detailed knowledge of pregnancy, labor, and postpartum care that had been accumulated over generations. They attended births not only as medical practitioners, but also as spiritual guides who helped ensure safe passage for both mother and child. Viking women's influence extended into the realm of diplomacy and political negotiation. Elite women often served as intermediaries in disputes between families or communities, using their positions to facilitate peaceful resolutions to conflicts. Their role as marriage negotiators gave them intimate knowledge of political relationships and alliance networks, making them valuable advisors on diplomatic matters. The concept of honor was as important to Viking women as it was to men, though it manifested in different ways. A woman's honor was connected to her reputation for competence, integrity, and proper behavior within social expectations. Maintaining honor required not only personal virtue, but also the successful management of household and family responsibilities. Women who violated social expectations or failed in their duties could face serious consequences, including social ostracism, divorce, or public humiliation. However, the same system that punished failure also rewarded success, providing recognition and elevated status for women who demonstrated exceptional skills or achievements. The seasonal rhythms of Viking life created different expectations and opportunities for women throughout the year. During the summer months, when men were often away on raids or trading expeditions, women assumed greater responsibility for community leadership and decision-making. This seasonal authority provided opportunities for women to demonstrate their capabilities and establish their reputations within the community. Winter presented different challenges and opportunities, as extended periods of indoor activity created intensive social interactions within households and communities. Women's skills in managing these complex social situations, maintaining morale during difficult periods, and organizing entertainment and cultural activities became particularly important during the long, dark months. The transition from girlhood to womanhood was marked by specific rituals and ceremonies that recognized the change in social status and expectations. Young women learned their future roles through apprenticeship with older female relatives, gradually assuming greater responsibilities as they demonstrated competence and maturity. Marriage represented the most significant transition in a Viking woman's life, but it was not necessarily a restriction on her activities or influence. Many women found that marriage enhanced their social status and provided new opportunities for economic and political involvement. The responsibilities of managing a household and raising children were seen as important contributions to community welfare rather than limitations on personal development. The relationship between Viking women and the broader European context reveals how exceptional their status was for the time period. Foreign observers often commented on the unusual freedoms enjoyed by Scandinavian women, sometimes with admiration and sometimes with disapproval. These observations provide valuable insights into both Viking culture and the attitudes of neighboring societies. As Christianity began to influence Viking society, women's roles gradually evolved to conform more closely to medieval European norms. However, the transition was slow and incomplete, with many traditional practices persisting long after the formal adoption of Christian beliefs. The legacy of Viking women's relatively high status continued to influence Scandinavian culture for centuries, contributing to the region's reputation for gender equality that persists to this day. Understanding women's roles in Viking society provides crucial insights into the culture's values, priorities, and social organization. The complex interplay between legal rights, economic opportunities, religious authority, and social expectations created a framework that allowed women to exercise significant influence while operating within cultural constraints that differed markedly from modern concepts of gender equality. The expectations placed upon Viking men were as complex and demanding as those governing women, but they centered around entirely different concepts of honor, duty, and social contribution. Viking masculinity was not simply about physical strength or martial prowess, though these qualities were certainly valued. Instead, it encompassed a sophisticated code of behavior that governed everything from personal relationships to business dealings, from religious obligations to political participation. The foundation of Viking masculinity rested on the concept of honor, known as somi, or verthing. This was not merely personal reputation, but a tangible social asset that could be gained, lost, traded, and inherited. A man's honor affected not only his own prospects but those of his entire family, making its preservation and enhancement a constant preoccupation that influenced virtually every aspect of daily life. Honor was earned through demonstrable achievements in multiple spheres of activity. Military valor was certainly one path to honor, but it was by no means the only one. Successful farming, skilled craftsmanship, wise leadership, generous hospitality, and eloquent speech-making were all recognized as honorable pursuits that could elevate a man's social standing within his community. The warrior ideal, while important, was more nuanced than popular culture suggests. Viking society distinguished between different types of martial excellence, recognizing that true warrior honor required not just battlefield courage, but also strategic thinking, loyalty to comrades, and adherence to combat ethics. The berserker, while feared and sometimes respected, was not necessarily considered the highest form of warrior. More admired was the steady, reliable fighter who protected his community and fulfilled his obligations to his lord and comrade. Young Viking men underwent informal but rigorous training in martial skills from early childhood. This training encompassed not only weapon handling and combat techniques, but also the psychological preparation necessary for warfare. Boys learned to manage fear, make quick decisions under pressure, and maintain unit cohesion during chaotic battles. The mental aspects of warrior training were considered as important as physical conditioning. The weapons training process began with wooden practice implements and gradually progressed to real weapons as boys demonstrated competence and maturity. Swords were particularly prestigious weapons, often passed down through family lines as precious heirlooms. However, the average Viking warrior was more likely to fight with spears, axes, and shields, weapons that were both effective in combat and useful for daily tasks, like hunting and farm work. Personal combat skills were complemented by training in group tactics and battlefield coordination. Vikings fought in organized formations that required discipline, communication, and mutual trust. The famous shield wall, while simple in concept, demanded extensive practice to execute effectively under combat conditions. Each man had to know his role, trust his neighbors, and maintain formation discipline even when facing terrifying enemies. However, the warrior role represented only one aspect of Viking masculine identity. The concept of the good farmer was equally important and perhaps more fundamental to daily life. Agricultural success required extensive knowledge, hard work, and careful planning, qualities that were highly respected within Viking society. The ability to read weather patterns, manage livestock, and organize seasonal work demonstrated the kind of practical intelligence that communities valued. Farm management encompassed far more than simple agricultural production. Viking farmers had to understand animal husbandry, crop rotation, tool maintenance, and food preservation. They needed to plan ahead for harsh winters, coordinate with neighbors for large projects, and adapt to changing environmental conditions. Success in farming required the same strategic thinking and leadership skills that were valued in warfare. The role of household head carried tremendous responsibilities and social expectations. A Viking man was expected to provide not only for his immediate family but also for various dependents, including elderly relatives, unmarried sisters, and household servants or slaves. This responsibility extended beyond mere material provision to include protection, guidance, and representation in legal matters. Hospitality was a crucial aspect of masculine honor that could make or break a man's reputation. Viking culture placed enormous importance on the proper treatment of guests, and a man's status was often judged by his ability to provide generous hospitality to visitors. This expectation created significant economic pressure, as families needed to maintain reserves of food, drink, and gifts that could be deployed when important guests arrived unexpectedly. The hosting obligations included not only material provision, but also entertainment and protection. Guests expected to be fed well, given comfortable sleeping arrangements, and entertained with stories, music, and games. The host was also responsible for his guests' safety while they remained under his roof, creating potential conflicts if disputes arose between visitors and local residents. Legal obligations formed another critical component of Viking masculinity. Men were expected to participate in local assemblies, known as things, where legal disputes were resolved and community decisions were made. Active participation in these assemblies was both a right and a responsibility that defined full membership in the community. The Thing system required men to possess extensive knowledge of legal precedents, proper procedures, and traditional law. Effective participation demanded not only understanding of legal principles but also skills in public speaking, negotiation, and political maneuvering. Men who excelled in legal matters could build significant reputations and influence that extended far beyond their immediate communities. Legal disputes often involved complex issues of honor, property rights, and family obligations. Viking men needed to understand not only their own rights and responsibilities, but also the intricate web of relationships and obligations that connected families and communities. A mistake in legal proceedings could have consequences lasting for generations, making legal competence essential for maintaining family honor. The concept of loyalty was central to Viking masculine identity, but it operated on multiple levels that sometimes created conflicting obligations. A man owed loyalty to his family, his lord, his community, and his gods, and these different loyalties did not always align. Managing these competing obligations required wisdom, courage, and sometimes difficult personal sacrifices. Loyalty to one's lord or chieftain was particularly important for men who sought advancement through military or political service. This relationship was formalized through oath-swearing ceremonies that created mutual obligations lasting until death. The lord was expected to provide protection, rewards, and opportunities for honor, while the sworn man owed military service, political support, and personal loyalty. The breakdown of lord-follower relationships could have devastating consequences for both parties. A lord who failed to protect or reward his followers could lose their loyalty and find himself isolated in times of crisis. Conversely, a follower who betrayed his oath faced social ostracism and the loss of honor that could make him an outcast from respectable society. Family loyalty often took precedence over other obligations, particularly when it came to protecting family honor or avenging wrongs committed against relatives. The concept of blood feud, while potentially destructive, was seen as a masculine duty that could not be avoided without losing honor. Men were expected to pursue justice for crimes against their families, even when doing so involved significant personal risk. The management of family feuds required considerable diplomatic skill, as the goal was often not total victory, but an honorable resolution that satisfied the demands of justice while minimizing long-term consequences. Successful feud management might involve negotiating compensation payments, arranging marriages between feuding families, or finding face-saving compromises that allowed all parties to maintain their honor. Religious obligations provided another framework for masculine behavior, though these were gradually transformed as Christianity replaced traditional Norse beliefs. In the traditional system, men were expected to maintain proper relationships with the gods through regular offerings, participation in seasonal festivals, and adherence to religious taboos and customs. The warrior cult of Odin demanded particular devotion from men who sought success in battle. This involved not only ritual observances, but also the cultivation of specific psychological states and behaviors associated with the god. Warriors might engage in practices designed to induce battle fury, seek prophetic dreams, or perform acts of ritual sacrifice before important campaigns. The transition to Christianity created new expectations and obligations while maintaining many traditional concepts of masculine behavior. Christian Viking men were expected to demonstrate the same courage, loyalty, and leadership qualities as their pagan predecessors, but within a framework that emphasized different virtues and discouraged some traditional practices like feuding and revenge. Economic success represented another crucial aspect of Viking masculinity. Men were expected to be productive members of society who contributed to their community's prosperity, while accumulating wealth for their families. This expectation encompassed not only primary occupations like farming or craftsmanship, but also participation in trade networks and other economic opportunities. The pursuit of wealth through raiding and trading expeditions was seen as a legitimate and honorable activity for young men. These ventures provided opportunities to demonstrate courage, acquire valuable goods, and establish reputations that could benefit participants throughout their lives. However, successful participation required extensive preparation, careful planning, and the ability to work effectively with diverse groups of men under challenging conditions. Craftsmanship offered another pathway to economic success and social recognition. Skilled artisans who produced high-quality goods could accumulate substantial wealth while building reputations that extended far beyond their local communities. The most accomplished craftsmen might attract customers from distant regions, creating international networks that enhanced their family's status and opportunities. The concept of wisdom, known as viska, was highly valued in Viking men and encompassed much more than simple intelligence or education. Wisdom included the ability to understand complex social situations, make sound judgments under pressure, and provide effective leadership during crises. Wise men were sought after as advisors, mediators, and leaders, regardless of their other accomplishments. The development of wisdom was seen as a lifelong process that required extensive experience, careful observation, and continuous learning. Young men were encouraged to travel, seek out knowledgeable teachers, and expose themselves to diverse experiences that would broaden their understanding of the world. The accumulation of wisdom was considered one of the most important achievements of a successful life. Storytelling ability was closely connected to wisdom and represented another important masculine skill. Men who could tell engaging stories, recite traditional poems, and compose new verses were valued for their contributions to community entertainment and cultural preservation. The best storytellers might become professional skalds who could earn their living through their verbal artistry. The responsibility for cultural transmission fell heavily on men, particularly those who achieved positions of leadership within their communities. Fathers were expected to pass on not only practical skills and property to their sons, but also the stories, values, and traditions that defined their cultural identity. This educational role required extensive knowledge and the ability to adapt traditional teachings to changing circumstances. Physical appearance and personal grooming were important aspects of masculine presentation, though the specific requirements differed from those governing women. Viking men were expected to maintain their weapons and equipment in perfect condition, present themselves appropriately for different social occasions, and demonstrate through their appearance that they possessed the resources and discipline necessary for success. The management of personal reputation required constant attention to how one's actions were perceived and interpreted by others. Viking society was intensely social, and news of individual behavior spread quickly through communities. Men had to be constantly aware that their words and actions were being observed and evaluated, making consistency and reliability essential for maintaining social standing. Age brought different expectations and opportunities for Viking men. Young men were expected to be bold, adventurous, and eager to prove themselves through daring exploits. Middle-aged men were expected to demonstrate wisdom, stability, and effective leadership. Elderly men who had survived to old age were respected for their accumulated wisdom and experience, though they might face challenges if they could no longer fulfill their traditional roles. The transition between life stages required careful navigation, as men had to gradually shift their focus from personal achievement to family responsibility and community leadership. Those who successfully managed these transitions could enjoy long careers of increasing influence and respect, while those who failed to adapt might find themselves marginalized or forgotten. Understanding the complex expectations governing Viking masculinity reveals a society that demanded much from its men while providing multiple pathways to honor and success. The integration of warrior values with agricultural responsibility, legal participation with religious obligation, and individual achievement with community service created a comprehensive system that shaped behavior throughout the life cycle. These expectations were not merely abstract ideals, but practical guidelines that determined social status, economic opportunities, and personal relationships within Viking communities. The structure of Viking families was far more complex and fluid than modern nuclear family arrangements. Viking households operated as economic units, social networks, and cultural institutions that extended well beyond the immediate blood relations of parents and children. Understanding these family structures provides crucial insight into how Viking society organized itself and transmitted its values across generations. The typical Viking household, known as a hue, included not only the nuclear family but also extended relatives, servants, slaves, and sometimes temporary residents such as travelers, fostered children, or individuals seeking protection. These expanded households could include anywhere from a dozen to several dozen people, all living in close proximity and sharing resources under the authority of the household head and his wife. The concept of kinship in Viking society extended through both maternal and paternal lines, creating complex webs of relationships that could be activated for various purposes, including legal support, economic assistance, and political alliance. These kinship networks were carefully maintained through regular visits, gift exchanges, and participation in important family events. The strength of these connections often determined a family's ability to survive crises and take advantage of opportunities. Polygamy was legally permitted and socially acceptable within Viking society, though it was primarily practiced by wealthy and powerful men who could afford to support multiple wives and their children. The first wife, known as the husfreyja, held the highest status and primary authority over household management, while additional wives occupied subordinate positions within the family hierarchy. The practice of polygamy served multiple practical functions beyond personal preference or sexual gratification. Additional marriages created new alliance networks, provided insurance against the high mortality rates that could leave men without heirs, and demonstrated wealth and status within the community. However, polygamous arrangements also created potential for conflict and required careful management to maintain household harmony. Concubinage represented another form of recognized relationship that fell between formal marriage and casual sexual encounters. Concubines, typically women of lower social status or slaves, could bear children who were acknowledged by their fathers and granted certain inheritance rights, though they ranked below children born to legal wives. These arrangements provided flexibility within the marriage system while maintaining clear hierarchies of status and inheritance. The treatment of children within Viking families reflected the society's practical approach to survival and success. Children were seen as economic assets and potential inheritors who needed to be carefully trained and educated to fulfill their future roles. However, this practical orientation was tempered by genuine affection and concern for children's welfare, as evidenced by archaeological findings and literary sources. Child mortality rates were extremely high in Viking society, with perhaps half of all children dying before reaching adulthood. This harsh reality shaped parental attitudes and child-rearing practices in profound ways. Families had to balance emotional investment in their children with the practical recognition that many would not survive to contribute to the household's future prosperity. The naming of children was a significant cultural practice that reflected family history, religious beliefs, and social aspirations. Many Viking children received names that honored deceased relatives, particularly grandparents or other respected family members. This practice was believed to transfer some of the deceased person's qualities and luck to the child, while also maintaining family continuity across generations. The use of patronymic naming systems created clear genealogical records that could be traced back through multiple generations. A child's surname indicated their father's name, creating names like Eriksson, or Thorsdottir, Thor's daughter. These naming patterns helped maintain awareness of family relationships and inheritance rights within communities where many families shared similar given names. The early years of a Viking child's life were dominated by the mother and other women within the household. Infants and toddlers remained in close proximity to their mothers, who were responsible for feeding, protection, and early socialization. During this period, children absorbed the rhythms of household life and began learning basic social expectations through observation and imitation. Weaning typically occurred between ages 2 and 3, marking the child's first step toward independence and expanded social interaction. This transition was often accompanied by simple ceremonies or rituals that recognized the child's growing maturity and changing role within the household. From this point forward, children began taking on simple responsibilities and learning basic skills appropriate to their gender and social status. The education of Viking children was primarily practical and experiential, focusing on the skills and knowledge necessary for survival and success in adult life. Formal schooling, as understood in modern terms, did not exist, but children received intensive training in their future occupations through apprenticeship arrangements and direct participation in adult activities. Boys typically began learning masculine skills around age 5 or 6, starting with simple tasks like caring for animals, gathering firewood, and assisting with basic farm work. As they grew older and demonstrated competence, they graduated to more complex responsibilities, including weapon handling, boat maintenance, and participation in hunting expeditions. The most important learning occurred through direct observation and imitation of adult men within their families and communities. Girls followed similar patterns but focused on the skills associated with household management and women's work. They learned textile production, food preparation, childcare, and the complex social skills necessary for managing households and maintaining family relationships. Like boys, girls progressed from simple tasks to increasingly complex responsibilities as they demonstrated maturity and competence. The concept of fostering played a crucial role in Viking child-rearing practices and family relationship networks. Children, particularly those from wealthy or noble families, were often sent to live with relatives or family allies for periods of education and socialization. These fostering arrangements created bonds between families that could last for generations and provided children with broader exposure to different skills, perspectives, and social connection. Foster relationships were formalized through agreements that specified the responsibilities of both families and the expectations for the child's care and education. Foster parents assumed full responsibility for their charge's welfare, including protection, education, and eventual establishment in adult life. In return, foster children owed loyalty and service to their foster families, creating relationships that complemented but did not replace their birth family ties. The practice of fostering served multiple social functions beyond education. It created insurance networks that could provide assistance during emergencies, established political alliances between families, and ensured that children received appropriate education even if their birth parents lacked necessary resources or expertise. Fostering also helped distribute the economic burden of child rearing among extended family networks. Religious education was integrated into daily life rather than conducted as separate formal instruction. Children learned about the gods, mythological stories, and ritual practices through participation in family and community religious observances. They absorbed religious knowledge gradually through stories, songs, and direct participation in seasonal festivals and life cycle ceremonies. The transition from traditional Norse religion to Christianity created new challenges and opportunities in religious education. Christian Viking families had to navigate between old and new belief systems, often maintaining some traditional practices while adopting Christian prayers, rituals, and moral teachings. This religious transition occurred gradually over several generations, allowing families to adapt their educational practices incrementally. The development of character and personality was considered as important as the acquisition of practical skills. Viking children were encouraged to demonstrate courage, loyalty, honesty, and generosity, qualities that were essential for success in adult life. These character traits were developed through storytelling, direct instruction, and opportunities to practice appropriate behavior in supervised situations. Storytelling played a particularly important role in character development and cultural transmission. Children gathered around fires during long winter evenings to hear tales of heroes, gods, and ancestors that illustrated important values and behavioral expectations. These stories served as both entertainment and moral instruction, helping children understand their cultural heritage and social responsibilities. The games and recreational activities enjoyed by Viking children often served educational purposes beyond simple entertainment. Boys played with miniature weapons and boats, practicing skills they would need as adult warriors and sailors. Girls played with dolls and miniature household items, rehearsing their future roles as wives and mothers. These play activities provided safe environments for learning and experimentation. Physical games and sports helped children develop strength, coordination, and competitive spirit. Swimming, running, wrestling, and ball games were popular activities that provided exercise while teaching lessons about perseverance, fair play, and graceful acceptance of both victory and defeat. These recreational activities also provided opportunities for children from different families to interact and form friendships. The age of majority and transition to adult status varied depending on individual development and family circumstances, but typically occurred during the teenage years. This transition was marked by increasing responsibilities, participation in adult decision-making, and eventual establishment of independent households or assumption of significant roles within extended family structures. Coming-of-age ceremonies were relatively informal compared to those found in some other cultures, but they did mark important transitions in social status and expectations. Young men might be given their first adult weapons or invited to participate in their first trading expedition. Young women might receive adult clothing or jewelry and begin participating in marriage negotiations. Marriage arrangements for children began early, often involving informal discussions between families when children were still quite young. These early negotiations were not binding commitments, but rather explorations of potential future alliances. As children approached marriageable age, these discussions became more serious and detailed, eventually leading to formal engagement agreements. The economic aspects of child rearing were significant considerations for Viking families. Children represented both current expenses and future investments, requiring careful calculation of costs and benefits. Families had to balance the immediate costs of feeding, clothing, and educating children against their potential future contributions as workers, warriors, and alliance builders. Inheritance planning began early in children's lives, with parents making tentative decisions about which children would inherit specific properties, roles, and responsibilities. These inheritance plans were not fixed but evolved as children demonstrated their capabilities and as family circumstances changed. The most successful children might receive enhanced inheritance shares, while those who proved disappointing might find their expectations reduced. Child labor was a normal and expected part of family life, with children contributing to household production from an early age. However, this work was generally appropriate to children's developmental stages and physical capabilities. Child labor was seen as educational rather than exploitative, providing opportunities for skill development and character building, rather than simply maximizing immediate economic returns. The legal status of children was complex, with rights and protections that varied according to age, gender, and family circumstances. Very young children had few independent legal rights and were considered extensions of their parents' legal personalities. As children aged and demonstrated competence, They gradually acquired limited legal standing that allowed them to participate in some legal proceedings and make certain decisions independently. Adoption and informal guardianship arrangements provided alternatives for children who lost their parents or whose families could not provide adequate care. These arrangements were typically made within extended family networks, ensuring that children maintained connections to their birth families while receiving necessary care and education. Adopted children could inherit from their adoptive parents while retaining some claims on their birth family's estates. The relationship between parents and children was expected to evolve over time, transitioning from authority and dependence in childhood to mutual respect and reciprocal obligation in adulthood. Adult children were expected to care for their elderly parents, provide assistance during crises, and maintain family honor through their own achievements and behavior. Discipline within Viking families balanced firm expectations with recognition of children's developmental limitations. Physical punishment was acceptable and common, but it was expected to be proportionate to offenses and administered with the goal of education rather than mere punishment. Parents who were excessively harsh or neglectful of their children faced community criticism and potential intervention. The seasonal rhythms of Viking life created different patterns of family interaction and child rearing throughout the year. Summer months brought increased activity, travel, and separation, as family members pursued various occupations. Winter months created intensive family interaction periods that were crucial for education, storytelling, and cultural transmission. Regional variations in family structures and child-rearing practices reflected differences in climate, economic activities, and cultural influences. Coastal families involved in fishing and trading developed different practices from inland agricultural families. Families in areas with frequent conflict adapted their child rearing to emphasize military skills, while those in peaceful regions could focus more heavily on economic and cultural education. Understanding Viking family structures and child rearing practices reveals a society that was both pragmatic and nurturing in its approach to the next generation. The integration of economic necessity with cultural transmission, the balance between individual development and family obligation, and the flexibility of arrangements that could adapt to changing circumstances all demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of human development and social organization. The religious and mythological beliefs of the Vikings permeated every aspect of their daily lives, including their most intimate relationships and personal behaviors. Far from being abstract theological concepts, these beliefs provided practical guidance for everything from marriage customs to child-rearing practices, from seasonal celebrations to life cycle transition. Understanding the religious context is essential for comprehending how Vikings approached relationships, sexuality, and family life. The Norse pantheon was populated by gods and goddesses, whose own relationships, conflicts, and adventures provided models and warnings for human behavior. These divine figures were not distant, perfect beings, but rather powerful entities with recognizable emotions, desires, and flaws. Their stories offered both inspiration and cautionary tales about the consequences of various choices and actions. Odin, the All-Father, embodied complex masculinity that included both martial prowess and intellectual curiosity. His numerous romantic adventures and marriages demonstrated that powerful men could maintain multiple relationships while fulfilling their responsibilities as leaders and protectors. However, his stories also illustrated the potential costs of deception and the importance of keeping oaths, even when they became inconvenient or dangerous. Frigg, Odin's primary wife, represented the ideal of feminine wisdom and domestic authority. Her ability to influence events through prophecy and political maneuvering showed that women could exercise significant power within marriage relationships, even when their husbands held formal authority. Her devotion to protecting her family, particularly her attempts to save her son Balder from his prophesied death, demonstrated the depths of maternal love and the lengths to which women might go to protect their children. The goddess Freyja occupied a unique position within the Norse pantheon. As a deity associated with both love and war, fertility and death. Her independence, sexual freedom, and magical abilities provided a model for women who refused to be confined by conventional expectations. Stories of Freya's numerous lovers and her willingness to use her sexuality to achieve her goals suggested that female desire and agency were not inherently shameful or dangerous. The relationship between Freya and her brother Freyr illustrated the complex connections between fertility, prosperity, and divine favor. These deities were associated with successful harvests, healthy livestock, and human fertility, making their worship essential for communities dependent on agricultural success. Marriages and sexual relationships conducted with proper reverence for these deities were believed to be blessed with prosperity and numerous offspring. Thor, the thunder god, represented a different model of masculinity that emphasized protection of community and family over personal adventure and glory. His marriage to the goddess Sif was portrayed as stable and harmonious, providing an example of successful partnership between strong-willed individuals. Thor's dedication to protecting Midgard from giants and monsters demonstrated that the highest form of masculine honor involved defending those who depended on you. The trickster god Loki embodied the dangers and benefits of challenging social conventions. His shape-shifting abilities, including his transformation into female form and his bearing of children while in that form, suggested that gender roles were not absolute or unchangeable. However, his ultimate betrayal of the gods and his role in bringing about Ragnarok served as a warning about the consequences of taking such challenges too far. Marriage in Norse mythology was portrayed as both a source of strength and a potential vulnerability. The stories of divine marriages illustrated that successful partnerships required mutual respect, shared goals, and willingness to support each other during crises. However, they also showed that marriages could be destroyed by jealousy, deception, or conflicting loyalties, with consequences that extended far beyond the immediate couple. The concept of fate, embodied by the Norns who wove the threads of destiny, influenced Viking attitudes toward relationships and family planning. While individuals could make choices and take actions to influence their lives, the ultimate outcomes were determined by forces beyond human control. This understanding encouraged people to focus on behaving honorably and fulfilling their obligations, rather than trying to control outcomes they could not ultimately determine. Seasonal festivals provided regular opportunities for communities to celebrate and reinforce their religious beliefs, while also creating structured occasions for courtship, marriage negotiations, and family gatherings. These celebrations combined religious observance with social interaction in ways that strengthened both spiritual and human relationships. The winter solstice celebration, known as Yule, was particularly important for family relationships and domestic harmony. This extended festival period brought families together for feasting, gift-giving, and storytelling that reinforced bonds between generations. The religious aspects of Yule, including offerings to ancestors and household spirits, emphasized the continuity between past, present, and future generations of the family. Spring festivals celebrated fertility and renewal, providing appropriate times for weddings, betrothals, and other celebrations of new relationships. These celebrations often included rituals designed to ensure fertility for crops, livestock, and human families. Young people participated in dances and games that provided opportunities for courtship, while older family members conducted the serious business of marriage negotiations. Harvest festivals gave thanks for the year's bounty while also providing opportunities to evaluate family and community relationships. The success or failure of crops and livestock was interpreted as evidence of divine favor or displeasure, leading to discussions about what behaviors or attitudes might need to be modified to ensure continued prosperity. The role of religious specialists, including priests, priestesses, and seers, in personal and family matters was significant and multifaceted. These individuals provided guidance on everything from appropriate timing for weddings to interpretation of dreams and omens. Their advice could influence major life decisions and family relationships, making their approval and support important considerations for families planning significant changes. The vulva, or female shamans, held particular authority in matters related to fertility, childbirth, and family welfare. These spiritual practitioners possessed extensive knowledge of herbal remedies, magical rituals, and divination techniques that were believed to influence personal relationships and family success. Their services were sought for everything from ensuring conception to resolving marital disputes. The practice of seeking divine guidance through various forms of divination was integrated into decision-making processes related to relationships and family life. Rune casting, dream interpretation, and observation of natural omens were all used to determine favorable times for important events and to understand the likely consequences of various choices. Religious taboos and restrictions shaped daily behavior in ways that affected personal relationships and family life. Certain days were considered inauspicious for weddings or other important ceremonies, while specific ritual observances were required before undertaking significant endeavors. These restrictions provided structure for family planning and community coordination while reinforcing religious authority. The concept of spiritual pollution and the need for purification influenced attitudes toward sexuality and reproduction. Certain activities or conditions, including menstruation, childbirth, and sexual intercourse, were believed to create temporary states of spiritual impurity that required ritual cleansing before individuals could participate in religious observances or enter sacred spaces. The gradual conversion to Christianity created significant challenges and opportunities for Viking families as they navigated between old and new belief systems. This transition occurred over several generations, allowing families to adapt gradually while maintaining some traditional practices within Christian frameworks. The Christian emphasis on monogamous marriage and sexual restraint conflicted with traditional Norse practices that permitted polygamy and concubinage. However, the transition was not immediate or complete, with many families continuing traditional practices while adopting Christian terminology and some Christian rituals. This religious syncretism created hybrid practices that combined elements from both belief systems. The Christian concept of sin introduced new categories of forbidden behavior that had not existed in traditional Norse religion. However, the practical implementation of Christian moral standards was often adapted to accommodate existing social structures and cultural practices. Local priests and religious authorities frequently made compromises that allowed communities to maintain social stability while gradually adopting Christian beliefs. The role of monasteries and Christian religious communities in Viking society created new models for religious life that offered alternatives to traditional family structures. Some individuals chose celibate religious vocations that removed them from the marriage market and family formation, though these choices were often motivated as much by political or economic considerations as by spiritual calling. The preservation of traditional mythological stories within Christian contexts ensured that old beliefs continued to influence cultural attitudes even after formal conversion. These stories were often reinterpreted as historical accounts rather than religious narratives, allowing them to maintain their cultural influence while avoiding direct conflict with Christian doctrine. The integration of Christian and traditional Norse calendar observances created new hybrid festivals that combined religious observance with social celebration. Christmas incorporated elements from Yule celebrations, while Easter adopted some spring fertility rituals. These hybrid celebrations allowed communities to maintain cultural continuity while demonstrating their commitment to Christian faith. The development of Christian marriage ceremonies adapted traditional Norse wedding customs while adding new religious elements. The Church's blessing became an important component of marriage validation, but many traditional elements, including feast celebrations, gift exchanges, and community participation, were retained and integrated into Christian frameworks. The Christian emphasis on the afterlife and eternal salvation introduced new considerations into family planning and relationship choices. The concept of marriage as a sacrament that continued beyond death created different expectations for spousal relationships, while the possibility of eternal damnation added spiritual dimensions to moral decision-making that had not existed in traditional Norse belief. The role of Christian priests in family counseling and dispute resolution provided new resources for couples and families facing relationship difficulties. However, the advice and guidance offered by Christian clergy often reflected different values and priorities from traditional Norse approaches, creating potential conflicts between religious instruction and cultural expectations. The monastic emphasis on education and literacy gradually introduced new forms of cultural transmission that supplemented traditional oral storytelling. Written religious texts and Christian educational materials began to influence how families understood their relationships and responsibilities, though this influence was initially limited to the wealthy and powerful who had access to literacy. The Christian concept of individual salvation created new frameworks for understanding personal responsibility and moral choice within family relationships, while traditional Norse religion emphasized collective honor and family reputation. Christianity focused on individual accountability to God, potentially creating conflicts between family loyalty and religious obligation. The gradual development of church law and canonical regulations governing marriage, divorce, and family life introduced new legal frameworks that competed with traditional Norse legal customs. These developments created complex situations where families had to navigate between different legal systems while maintaining their social standing and cultural identity. The missionary activities of Christian evangelizers often targeted women and family leaders as key figures for conversion, recognizing that religious change was most effective when it occurred within existing social structures. This strategy acknowledged the importance of family relationships in religious transmission, while also creating potential conflicts between converted and non-converted family members. The architectural development of churches and Christian worship spaces created new centers for community gathering that competed with traditional religious sites. However, many Christian churches were built on locations that had previously held religious significance, allowing communities to maintain connections to sacred landscapes while adopting new religious practices. The Christian calendar of saints' days and religious observances created new rhythms for family and community life that gradually replaced traditional seasonal festivals. However, many of these Christian observances incorporated elements from older celebrations, ensuring cultural continuity while facilitating religious transformation. Understanding the religious and mythological context of Viking relationships reveals how deeply spiritual beliefs influenced every aspect of personal and family life. The complex interplay between divine examples, seasonal celebrations, religious specialists, and community expectations created frameworks that shaped individual choices while maintaining social stability and cultural continuity across generations. The gradual transition to Christianity demonstrated both the flexibility of these cultural systems and the enduring influence of religious beliefs on relationship patterns and family structure. The decline of traditional Viking society was not a sudden collapse, but rather a gradual transformation that unfolded over several centuries, fundamentally altering the social structures, cultural practices, and intimate relationships that had defined Scandinavian life for generations. This transformation was driven by multiple converging forces, including political centralization, religious conversion, economic changes, and external pressures that ultimately reshaped every aspect of Viking culture, including their distinctive approaches to family life, relationships, and gender roles. The process of political centralization that began in the 10th and 11th centuries fundamentally altered the social foundations upon which Viking family structures had been built. Traditional Viking society had been organized around relatively independent local chieftains and family groups who maintained their authority through personal relationships, military prowess, and control over local resources. As powerful kings like Harald Fairhair in Norway, Gorm the Old in Denmark, and Erik the Victorious in Sweden consolidated power, they gradually undermined these traditional authority structures. The emergence of centralized monarchies required new forms of social organization that prioritized loyalty to distant kings over traditional family and clan relationships. This shift had profound implications for marriage arrangements, inheritance patterns, and family decision-making processes. Families that had previously made independent choices about marriages and alliances now found themselves subject to royal approval and interference. The autonomy that had characterized Viking family life began to erode as central authorities imposed new laws and expectations on personal relationships. The conversion to Christianity, which occurred gradually between the 10th and 12th centuries, represented perhaps the most significant transformation in Viking social and cultural life. This religious revolution went far beyond changes in worship practices to fundamentally alter concepts of marriage, sexuality, family structure, and gender roles that had been central to Viking identity for centuries. Christian marriage concepts introduced the revolutionary idea that marriage was a sacrament ordained by God rather than primarily a practical arrangement between families. This theological shift elevated the spiritual significance of marriage, while simultaneously restricting the flexibility that had characterized traditional Viking marriage practices. The Christian emphasis on monogamy directly challenged the accepted practice of polygamy that had allowed wealthy Viking men to maintain multiple wives and concubines. The gradual implementation of Christian marriage law created complex transitional periods where families had to navigate between old and new systems. Men who had multiple wives under traditional law faced pressure to designate one as their legitimate Christian wife, while finding alternative arrangements for the others. These transitions often created significant hardship and social conflict, as families struggled to maintain their relationships within new legal and religious frameworks. The Christian concept of celibacy, particularly the requirement that priests remain unmarried, introduced entirely new models of masculine identity that conflicted with traditional Viking values. The warrior-farmer ideal that had dominated Viking masculinity emphasized marriage, procreation, and the accumulation of family wealth and honor. Christian clerical celibacy suggested that spiritual achievement might require the renunciation of these traditional masculine goals, creating alternative pathways to social respect and influence. Women's roles underwent particularly complex changes during the Christian transition. While Christianity introduced some concepts of spiritual equality and provided new avenues for religious authority through convents and religious communities, it also imposed restrictions on women's legal independence and economic autonomy that had been characteristic of Viking society. The Christian emphasis on female chastity and submission conflicted with traditional Norse concepts of female strength and independence. The development of Christian educational institutions gradually introduced literacy and new forms of cultural transmission that competed with traditional oral storytelling and cultural preservation methods. Monastic schools and cathedral schools created new pathways for education that were initially available primarily to boys destined for religious careers. This educational transformation gradually altered how cultural knowledge was preserved and transmitted, affecting everything from family histories to practical skills. Economic transformations also played crucial roles in the decline of traditional Viking society and the evolution of family structures. The expansion of trade networks and the development of more sophisticated commercial practices created new forms of wealth accumulation that challenged traditional economic relationships based on land ownership, livestock, and raiding activities. The growth of towns and urban centers drew people away from traditional rural communities where extended family networks had provided economic security and social identity. Urban life created new economic opportunities, but also disrupted traditional family structures as individuals pursued careers and relationships outside their ancestral communities. The nuclear family began to emerge as a more important economic unit as extended family networks became less relevant to daily survival and prosperity. The evolution of monetary systems and commercial law created new frameworks for economic relationships that gradually replaced traditional systems based on personal obligation and family loyalty. Written contracts and legal institutions began to supplement or replace the personal relationships and verbal agreements that had governed economic activity in traditional Viking society. The cessation of raiding activities, which had been both an economic strategy and a cultural institution, removed important opportunities for young men to prove themselves and acquire wealth and status. This change required the development of alternative pathways to masculine achievement and social advancement, contributing to the evolution of new social structures and cultural values. The development of more sophisticated agricultural techniques and the expansion of cultivated land created new forms of wealth based on intensive farming rather than the extensive pastoral and raiding activities that had characterized traditional Viking economy. These agricultural developments supported larger populations, but also required different forms of social organization and labor management. Military innovations and changing warfare patterns also contributed to the transformation of Viking society. The development of heavy cavalry, siege techniques, and professional armies reduced the military effectiveness of traditional Viking warrior bands. The individual warrior skills and personal courage that had been central to Viking masculine identity became less relevant as warfare became more technological and organized. The construction of fortifications and the development of defensive strategies made traditional Viking raiding less profitable and more dangerous. Communities that had been vulnerable to Viking attacks developed better defenses, while rulers consolidated power and resources in ways that made large-scale raiding increasingly difficult to sustain. The integration of Scandinavian kingdoms into broader European political and economic systems reduced the isolation that had allowed Viking culture to develop its distinctive characteristics. Diplomatic relationships, royal marriages, and commercial agreements created new obligations and opportunities that gradually drew Scandinavian societies into conformity with broader European cultural patterns. The influence of continental European culture became increasingly apparent in architecture, art, literature, and social customs. The distinctive Viking aesthetic and cultural expressions gradually gave way to styles and practices that reflected broader European trends. This cultural homogenization reduced the distinctive character of Viking civilization while integrating Scandinavian societies into larger cultural communities. Legal transformations played important roles in changing family structures and social relationships. The gradual replacement of traditional thing assemblies with royal courts and professional legal systems altered how disputes were resolved and how social relationships were regulated. Written law codes began to replace oral legal traditions, creating more standardized but less flexible approaches to social regulation. The development of feudal institutions and concepts of land tenure challenged traditional relationships between families and their ancestral properties. The emergence of concepts like serfdom and feudal obligation created new forms of dependency that differed significantly from traditional Viking social relationships based on kinship and personal loyalty. The establishment of formal educational institutions created new social hierarchies based on literacy and learning, rather than traditional measures of status, such as martial prowess, family lineage, or agricultural success. These educational developments created new opportunities for social advancement, but also contributed to the breakdown of traditional community structures. Environmental and demographic factors also influenced the transformation of Viking society. Climate changes during the medieval warm period and subsequent cooling affected agricultural productivity and population growth patterns. These environmental shifts required adaptations in settlement patterns, economic strategies, and social organization. Population growth in some regions created pressures on traditional resource management systems, while population decline in others disrupted community structures and cultural transmission. These demographic changes affected marriage patterns, inheritance practices, and family formation strategies as communities adapted to changing circumstances. The establishment of colonial settlements in Iceland, Greenland, and North America created new social experiments that both preserved and modified traditional Viking cultural practices. These colonial communities developed unique adaptations to their environments, while maintaining connections to Scandinavian cultural traditions. The gradual abandonment of some colonial settlements, particularly in Greenland and North America, demonstrated the limitations of traditional Viking social and economic strategies when confronted with challenging environmental conditions and hostile neighbors. These colonial failures contributed to the concentration of Scandinavian populations in regions where traditional practices could be more easily maintained and adapted. The literary preservation of Viking culture through the compilation of sagas, eddas, and other written works created new forms of cultural memory that both preserved and transformed traditional stories and values. This literary works, primarily composed after the conversion to Christianity, reflected the complex process of cultural adaptation and provided foundations for later Romantic reconstructions of Viking culture. The development of vernacular literature in Scandinavian languages created new forms of cultural expression that competed with both traditional oral storytelling and Latin Christian literature. This literary development contributed to the emergence of distinctive national cultures that drew on Viking heritage while adapting to contemporary circumstances. The transformation of Viking culture was not uniform across all regions or social groups. Rural communities often maintained traditional practices longer than urban centers, while wealthy families had greater resources to adapt to changing circumstances compared to poorer households. These variations created complex patterns of cultural change that reflected the diversity of responses to transformative pressures. The preservation of some Viking cultural elements within Christian frameworks allowed certain traditional practices to survive in modified forms. Festival celebrations, storytelling traditions, and social customs were often adapted rather than abandoned, creating hybrid cultural forms that maintained connections to Viking heritage while conforming to Christian requirements. The legacy of Viking culture extended far beyond Scandinavia through migration, conquest, and cultural influence. Viking settlements in Britain, Ireland, France, Russia, and other regions created lasting cultural impacts that influenced language, law, art, and social practices. These international legacies ensured that Viking cultural elements persisted even as traditional Viking society transformed in Scandinavia. The Romantic revival of interest in Viking culture during the 18th and 19th centuries created new interpretations and representations of Viking life that often differed significantly from historical reality. These Romantic reconstructions emphasized the heroic and adventurous aspects of Viking culture, while sometimes ignoring or misrepresenting more complex social and cultural reality. Modern archaeological and historical research has provided increasingly sophisticated understanding of Viking society that reveals both the achievements and limitations of traditional Viking culture. This scholarly work has demonstrated the complexity of Viking social relationships and cultural practices, while also illustrating how these traditional patterns were transformed by changing historical circumstances. The influence of Viking cultural values on modern Scandinavian societies can be seen in contemporary attitudes toward gender equality, democratic participation, and individual autonomy. While these modern values differ significantly from historical Viking practices, they may reflect cultural continuities that connect contemporary Scandinavia to its Viking heritage. The global fascination with Viking culture in popular media and entertainment demonstrates the continuing appeal of Viking symbols and stories, even though these modern representations often bear little resemblance to historical reality. This popular interest in Viking culture reflects broader human fascination with societies that appear to offer alternatives to contemporary social constraints and expectations. Understanding the decline and transformation of Viking society provides important insights into how cultures adapt to changing circumstances, while maintaining elements of their distinctive identity. The Viking experience demonstrates both the resilience of cultural traditions and their susceptibility to transformation when confronted with powerful external pressures and internal developments. The story of Viking culture's evolution, from its traditional forms to its integration into medieval European civilization, illustrates the complex processes through which distinctive societies are transformed while contributing elements to broader cultural developments. This transformation was neither simple loss nor straightforward progress, but rather a complex adaptation that preserved some elements while abandoning others. The legacy of Viking approaches to relationships, family life, and social organization continues to influence contemporary discussions about gender roles, family structures, and individual autonomy. While we cannot and should not attempt to recreate historical Viking society, understanding their distinctive approaches to these fundamental human concerns provides valuable perspective on the diversity of possible social arrangements and cultural values. The gradual transformation of Viking society ultimately demonstrates that even the most distinctive and successful cultural traditions must adapt to survive in changing historical circumstances. The Vikings' remarkable achievements in exploration, trade, art, and social organization were ultimately integrated into broader cultural developments that reshaped European civilization. Their story reminds us that cultural change is inevitable, but that the values and practices that define distinctive societies can continue to influence human development long after their original contexts have disappeared.